Welcome to the MedSpa Success Strategies podcast, where MedSpa and aesthetics practice owners come to discover strategies and tactics that help them better market and manage their practices so they can grow, improve profits, and have more financial freedom. I'm your host, Ricky Shockley with MedSpa Magic Marketing, and I'm excited to be joined today by Scott Carson, the founder and CEO of MRP. MRP works with you to select the right type of equipment for your needs at a fair price. Scott has more than 30 years of healthcare marketing, sales, and management experience. He was part of the team that built the eBay healthcare marketplace structure and strategy, and he's a nationally recognized leader and speaker in driving sales through internet transactional platforms. He founded US Medical Inc., the first internet distributor of new and pre-owned capital medical equipment to the healthcare industry. Started in his basement, US Medical emerged 5 years later as a member of the Inc. 500. As a result, Scott was twice named a finalist in the Ernst & Young's Entrepreneur of the Year award competition and was twice named among Inc. 500's fastest growing companies. He is a Micro Enterprise of the Year recipient. All right, Scott, thanks so much for joining us. We're excited to have you on the podcast today.
Likewise, appreciate the opportunity, Ricky, and good to meet you.
Yeah, so I'm excited about this interview today. On a lot of our previous episodes, we've talked to spa owners, consultants, and I'm excited to kind of dig into some specific avenues of how we can provide advice and information to med spa owners and practice owners. And I think this is going to be a really interesting conversation today. So first, though, I wanted to start a little bit with your backstory. Could you kind of tell us your history in the industry and how MRP came to be from that?
You bet. It's I'll make it brief just to give some people some context. I started out, interestingly, as a medical equipment rep, but I had come out of the automotive industry, and it just never made any sense to me that medical equipment device companies wouldn't take trade-ins. It just seemed so natural coming out of the automotive industry that wouldn't be a natural sales process discussion, at least. And surprisingly, it wasn't. And that led to me kind of getting involved in pre-owned and new equipment sales. And about that time, it was kind of the beginning of the internet. It was late 1999, and it's going back a long time. And we were moving from broadcast faxing to the internet, to technology. And there was a lot of companies that were involved in kind of bringing healthcare to the online world. And I was part of some of these companies and got an early taste of how that all came together and how it all functioned. In most of those companies, I actually can't think of any that actually survived, like many of the things in the early .com days. And many years later, I was part of another company that was really pioneering online transactions and healthcare capital equipment, and some pharma, some med surg. And I started to work with eBay at the time, and eBay reached out to me to help them build the eBay healthcare marketplace. And at the time, eBay was primarily what's called a practical and collectible marketplace. Practicals being golf clubs and washing machines and things like that. Collectibles being Beanie Babies. They had jewelry, but they really weren't known for fashion or automotives or restaurant equipment or healthcare, any of those things. And so eBay would reach out to industry leaders and begin to categorize and provide functionality and naming conventions and all of those things to a platform to make it more functional for the constituents that were in those markets. Because you can imagine if you're selling Beanie Babies, that's not necessarily going to transfer to a piece of healthcare equipment. And eBay was very successful in some markets. For example, eBay Motors really became the beginning of automotive online transactions. Another company called AutoBuyTel and eBay really became what we all experience today when we buy cars online. If it wasn't for what happened there, we wouldn't have this great revolution of everything automotive online. And in other places, eBay was very unsuccessful. They tried to break into real estate, and it just didn't work. It had a similar effect to what Zillow experienced this past year. It just didn't really work. Healthcare was pretty successful. Healthcare today represents about 800 to 900 million a year. 97% of it used on eBay. And back then, we provided the pricing, the categorization, how we differentiated between accessories and the actual core asset. So there was a lot of things that were put into place. And after that, it was just not taking off healthcare online, capital equipment, and pharma the way we thought. There was a lot of patient healthcare that was evolving and working really well, but the actual transactions, clinicians and hospitals really weren't functional. And at the time, we kind of identified that to being that the people that were making healthcare decisions, Ricky, at the time were older and they weren't digitally native. They didn't grow up with technology. They weren't really adopting well to consumer online purchasing in any capacity. They weren't buying plane tickets online. They weren't later on getting Ubers. They weren't using Airbnb. They weren't doing any of that. So the idea that they were going to migrate to online purchasing, we just knew it was going to be a while. And so then I went off to do other things. I worked in private equity. I ran a company in Europe for many years. And then about 8 or 9 years ago, I started to see that more and more purchasing in healthcare was being made by a younger purchaser. At the time, it was about 30 to 35. We started to see some purchasing being made by that age group. And then today, for example, we now know that about 65 to 70% of all purchasing in healthcare is made by millennials, someone in their 40ish range. About 70 to 90% in some reports recently do not want to interface with the sales rep. They want data. They want data stack sitting on tech. So we started to see about 7 or 8 years ago that this was really the trend for the future. And that's why we started to move into MRP. I think that it's important to kind of talk about where we landed at the same in the same breath, essentially, that we talk about where I started, because they really have been kind of one long path to kind of get to this point.
Full circle. So that kind of explains the component of how this business came to be, why now is kind of the right time for this type of business. Buying behavior has kind of changed. So the necessity for change, I guess, and I know on the website you all mentioned that the sales process from a lot of these device manufacturers is really unscrupulous, I think is the word that you use. Could you just touch on that and what you see with the problems of the current sales experience from a consumer perspective for a practice owner?
I think it has a tendency not necessarily to be disingenuous and dishonest, Ricky, just by its nature. I think it's the fact that when you operate without transparency and comparative analysis and data, that it lends an environment where things have to be sold versus things being purchased. So if you think about it, the way we used to buy airline tickets, we really didn't have a lot of information. The way we used to get hotels, we didn't have a lot of comparison analysis. But today, we really wouldn't even think about getting a hotel room without having some pricing analysis and location and some reviews alongside of it. The same thing with any consumer good. And the reason for that is because it doesn't really give us that trust that we're looking for. And so I think sometimes people, the lack of a trusting foundation then translates to kind of an unscrupulous or dishonest or disingenuous environment. So I don't think it's the industry is that way. I just think it's the nature of the way things are sold. The best way to look at this is healthcare is an industry that really operates in a medieval way, Ricky. We still have a sales rep in almost every sector of capital equipment, pharma, and med surg selling the very best product. They don't have two products. They can't sell somebody good and better, or better and best, or good and bad, or worse and better. Everything's the very best product. And the price is the very best price. And there's everything else isn't good. And I think that translates in this day and age to dishonesty when it's just the way things are still being sold. And if you think about in aesthetics, we have InMode reps, we have Allergan reps, we have Cynosure reps, we have taking it down to category, we have thread reps, and those reps only represent one thread. And if you think about that, not only is it a bunch of people selling the very best product, but it's incredibly expensive. And this, what people don't realize is who's paying for that is really patients that are paying for higher goods and services, because the clinicians are paying for higher goods and services because they have none of the data stack to decide what should be the product they should purchase for their particular practice. So the end result really is is not that the industry, I think, is disingenuous or dishonest or unscrupulous. It's just that's the way this kind of sales process is perceived in this day and age.
Yeah, it is really interesting that you have all of that transparency for like the B2C side of almost every market, but really in B2B in a lot of areas you don't. Like people are kind of guessing when they're hiring providers or they're trying to purchase medical equipment. So that makes a ton of sense. So I guess with that said, what are some of the pitfalls? What does the buying process look like now for, somebody who owns a med spa, for example? They're going to buy a new laser, a new piece of equipment. What does the process look like right now typically? Like where are they starting and what does that look like? And then what are some of the pitfalls that people are generally coming across along the way?
I want to go back to kind of the previous question because as I'm looking at kind of your studio, I see a guitar in the background and I see you're speaking to a microphone. There's really two things that come to mind. One in your past question, one going forward, and the next question. Think about this: when you bought that guitar, or if you go to sell that guitar, or if you want to look at another guitar, you can go to many sites and you can look at comparison products. You can look at things that are more expensive and why, and look at reviews. You can go down market and look at things that are less expensive. You can trade that in, and or you can sell it outright and buy something else. You can sell on one platform and buy on another platform. When you got that microphone and boom, I'm sure you looked at reviews and went to YouTube. You looked at all that information. You went to websites and you compared the pricing and the delivery time and the reviews. I'm guessing that took place, right?
Absolutely. We just got a new camera for the studio and I spent a ton of time because knew nothing about these products at all. So I spent a ton of time doing all of that research and that comparison shopping. So yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so what's fascinating is we expect this every day in our consumer lives, but yet in our corporate lives, it isn't there, which is really remarkable that the industry hasn't caught up to that. But even let me even take it a step further. Think about this: how many times a day does the guitar sales rep come knock on your door or call your office to sell you a guitar? How many times a day? Think about that. Now, when you think about our industry, there are sales reps that are literally attacking customers, just attacking customers in their homes, on their cell phones, over the weekend, at their practices, standing in their office, sitting in their waiting room. And I can't really think of an industry anywhere where that translates. So not only is there no data stack allowing us any of that comparative information, uptime, serviceability, downtime, parts cost, serviceability, peer-to-peer reviews, customer reviews, none of that exists. We also have an industry that is proactively attacking the customer base to buy stuff. And if you think about the insanity and the absurdity of that costs money too. So not only do you have no comparison data, you also have a sales structure in almost every organization that's proactively going after customers. If you think about it from our personal lives, can you imagine sales reps coming to your office to sell you cars or boats or planes or
Yeah.
forklifts? Or it just doesn't make any sense when you think about it in that practical way.
If you have transparency, you're kind of by nature not needing sales reps because you're giving the consumer the power to make an educated decision. So right now, does that process for a practice owner generally look like? Because I've never really spoken much about or talked to people much about this side of the business. So like somebody's buying a new laser, for example, are they just kind of going with the product they've heard most about? Like, is there any place that they're doing research currently? Are they just responding to sales reps who are trying to pitch those products for the most part? How does that buying process work right now?
Well, again, I think there's a lot of patient-driven marketing in this space where there's a lot of social created content out there about different products and services. Some of it very genuine and legitimate. A lot of it manufactured. For a clinician, it's hard to know whether this is real, patient kind of feedback, or is it somehow manufactured in some way. Trade shows are very proactively delivering information to customers. Again, it's a booth of one product and another booth of another product. You've got sales reps coming to their door. So there's a lot of information being thrown at clinicians about things that are going to increase patient satisfaction, profitability, patient conversion, better reviews in their practices. And so there's a mammoth amount of that kind of aggressive selling taking place. And that's really how the products are sold. As far as how a customer then says, okay, let me distill that and see where I can make the best decision with all of these options. Ricky, that really doesn't exist. They go to social forums such as Facebook and groups. They go to a lot of private groups they may be on, but even there, you've got shills in there that are maybe on behalf of the manufacturer in some way. Maybe they're a clinician being paid for the manufacturer. You know, it's very difficult to know who's giving you very honest feedback. So right now, um, as a customer, you've got all of this proactive selling going on. You have no place in which to validate that information in any way. And then you often feel trapped that you've got to make a decision because you're being told. And this is what's really interesting to me is the sales reps in this business, for the most part, have never run a business. They've never been responsible for a P&L. They've never been responsible for a payroll. They don't understand liability insurance. They know nothing about the costs and COGS associated with operating one of these businesses, but yet they're giving return on investment advice. They're giving payment advice. They're giving interest rate advice. They're giving all these things. If you think about it, is really astonishing because how should they be giving any of that business advice when they know nothing about how to run a business? So I kind of find it still, if you look at the layers that we're somewhat unraveling here, it's a really chaotic and unfair environment for a clinician to try to migrate to see what it is they really need for their practice.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And then, like you explained too, is that infrastructure makes everything more expensive, makes the product more expensive for the practice to purchase, and then it makes it more expensive for the patient to come in and get services. But you also touched on something there with a lot of this and the device purchases being driven by the patient side demand. I think you mentioned that. So you have a lot of these manufacturers that are heavily marketing to patients. So then I think there is probably some element of practices adopting those specific devices because they know that there's a patient demand. Like being an SEO person, we can check search volume. And if I look up laser skin tightening, there's not a ton of search volume, but if I look up cool sculpting, there is. So they're trying to become the Kleenex of their specific category.
Mm-hmm.
How do you kind of combat that in a way that's a win-win for all parties?
Well, I think that you and I could have a whole nother podcast or probably a series of podcasts on SEO and pay-per-click and content creation in the future and what's going to be relevant. Um, I think that's part of the problem right now is Ricky, it's so easy to manipulate market demand. Um, and frankly, we're also, we're part of that. We're trying to create awareness for products and we know how to pull those levers and make things more, uh, kind of more valid online. And so I think it's very difficult to do that. But again, how we migrate some of that is through peer-to-peer reviews and, uptime and serviceability. And the best way to look at this is talking about any side-by-side disruptive managed marketplace. And to give people an understanding of what that is, and this will specifically answer your question, is a side-by-side marketplace is kind of like Craigslist or Angie's List. That's a side-by-side marketplace where there's a buyer and a seller, and they find one another on that platform. A managed marketplace has some interaction in some way on there. This could be considered eBay, for example. There's some governance around that where payment is managed and reviews are managed. That's got a little more functionality. What really makes something side by side managed marketplace and also disruptive, although eBay was part of this in the beginning, less so today, but what makes a disruptive managed marketplace is something like Airbnb. And if you think about Airbnb in this sense, that we would never be able to find somebody who had a condo in Spokane if we wanted one, if it wasn't for Airbnb. And we would never be able to make that purchase if there wasn't that management sitting in the middle, peer to peer, basically reviews, mapping, photographs, pricing, locations, all of that kind of management that goes around that trusted experience. And then also the fact we would never be able to find that condo is what makes it a managed disruptive side by side marketplace. These ecosystems that exist in our consumers place, and we never think about them in the way that I'm defining them, but they probably make sense to you now what those things are. And by the way, this was not defined by me. This is defined by a gentleman named Craig Christensen from Harvard that I believe passed away a year or two ago. That really defined a lot of this marketplace nomenclature. And what I'm trying to explain is it's only through those platforms today that we are able to get that kind of true data information that allows us to make the best decision. So we may still use content platforms and other internet portals to give us information as well as pooling our patients on what things we want. But we need to go to these ecosystems that have this data so we can make the very best decision, just as we do a car, an airline ticket, a home, a condo, or a hotel room if we're renting it. We need that same information. And I think that's coming very, very quickly.
That's awesome. It really seems like you all, not to turn this, I know you don't want to turn this into a sales pitch for your business MRP necessarily, but you're really just filling that gap in the market. It doesn't sound like there are really alternatives to what you all are doing. You're trying to create something that for this industry just doesn't exist. And that's a really cool thing for practice owners and for patients, because like we talked about, it is a win-win for everybody involved,
Well,
other than maybe the sales rep.
yeah, I think this is really less about us. Is I think that I spend a lot of time on a daily and weekly basis really explaining something that is not invented by us or created by us. We're simply taking concepts that are just foreign, and I used that word earlier, medieval to healthcare. They're just new to healthcare, but they're not new to everything else that you and I do in our lives. They're just not. We're just applying it differently. I think what you're going to see over the next couple of years is this radical adoption to these, and it's not websites anymore. It's really these ecosystems that will start to come together where this data is going to originate and people will be empowered. I think you have to recognize how big the opportunity is and how insignificant really MRP will be in the overall thing. I think we'll be a catalyst, and I think we'll be one of the pioneers, and we'll be looked back on of some of the company that was really at the very beginning of this. But think about it in this concept or in this context. If you and I are very lucky in our lives, as most people are, we go to clinicians much more than we go to hospitals. We go to hospitals infrequently. But yet, hospitals, Ricky, are often talked about as the delivery of care. It's the hospital system. But if you think about it in the context that there's many more clinicians serving many more patients, infinitely greater on a clinical basis every day than hospitals do, yet every single clinician in the country is paying retail or over retail for every product because they have no aggregated buying power, let alone the data that I'm talking about. They have no aggregated data or platform in which to make decisions. They also are paying retail because they have no aggregated buying power. So what you're going to see is a massive amount of these ecosystems coming together to start aggregating clinicians, because when you aggregate 1,000 or 2,000 clinicians in buying power, you're effectively a small hospital or a hospital system. And you're going to start to get the same buying leverage that a hospital system does. And if you think about it, clinicians more than anyone deserve that buying leverage. They're the ones that are running a business and a P&L and have the employees, and they need an advantage. And I think the single biggest advantage clinicians are going to have over the next decade is this aggregated buying power through these platforms like MRP is creating. So this is going to be a really big revolution that's about to take place. And then some of the new technology that we're all hearing about, such as online chat, aggregation of data, chat, GPT, and others, these are going to allow us to not use form-based aggregation. This will use virtually just typing in some information. It'll populate the data for you in a data set that you can make a decision and then route it to the right way, with really giving you much better analytical input or output than you could ever get on your own by going to a form or a platform. So there's really going to be a massive revolution that occurs in this medieval healthcare market, and then it's going to be turbocharged with things like ChatGPT and other things, just given the way technology is evolving. So this is going to happen really, really quickly.
So that's awesome. So somebody that's listening to this and they're shopping new lasers right now. What are they to do at this moment to make sure they're not paying max dollar amount for a device? Like what are their options? You mentioned eBay earlier. What you all are doing? Like what is the smart move right now for a practice owner that's looking to buy a new laser and at this moment make the most educated decision and get the best price on a device?
Well, it's a really good question, especially in light of the fact that I didn't look at the market later on today, but in light of the fact of last Friday when we saw SVB take a dive, and then obviously other banks right behind it, and we're seeing kind of a stress on the regional banking system. We have to understand we're in a really unusual time, and so the message I'm about to give your listeners is really an important one. And I think the best way to describe that is making a little bit of a joke, which is, there's this tendency in aesthetics that there's a lot of urgency. And I can promise everybody that's listening, there's not a single hair removal emergency anywhere in the world. There just isn't. And I think if you start to look at things in that context, that there's not a photofacial emergency, there's not a hair removal emergency, there's not a skin resurfacing, there's not a Botox. Now, I know that I'm going to get a lot of pushback, so will you, the fact that there's not a Botox emergency, because I know there's plenty of them. But what I'm really trying to get people to understand, Ricky, is this is just not an industry where people are going to be injured or have catastrophic events if they don't get certain aesthetic treatments. The message there, Ricky, is to slow down, just slow down. There is a reason why there's so much pressure put on these things, because ultimately in the purchasing process, they're bad decisions. There's 1,200 pre-owned devices in our facility, and we're not even scratching the surface. There are hundreds of thousands of pre-owned assets that are out in the marketplace that are underutilized or never been utilized, because everybody out there is trying to solve hopes and dreams. Hey, I hate the reimbursable market, third-party insurance. I bought the wrong system, need something else. The industry preys on that, and people buy things out of emotion. You should completely eliminate emotion from your process. You should never take financial advice from a sales rep in any capacity. So my advice is really for people to slow down. Now, that seems incredibly counterintuitive for somebody who has a marketplace trying to sell things, but that's really not our mission. Our mission is to solve problems, and often we solve problems by getting people to not buy things, and to slow down and look at what they have in their practice and how they can redo that. So the number one thing is to slow down. And the second thing is to not take financial advice from anybody that isn't a financial analyst in some way. And those two things will really give you a good foundation to start on. And then you need to really do a fair amount of analysis. And I know it's difficult when you're running a practice to do that, but you have to be working with people that will give you that. And if you're not, you're probably at a disadvantage. And that doesn't mean that us, and we never will, have every single product and service. And we spend a lot of time, Ricky, talking to people, and they end up buying from new manufacturers or other resellers of new and used, because ultimately our goal is to create great experiences either with us or someone else. But really the third pillar is to take your time and do analysis. And if you think about it today, there's probably 20 to 25 microneedling RFs that are FDA cleared in the US. This is an incredibly complicated industry to kind of sort out, but it's to your advantage to take the time to research that. Also understand that there's massive variable pricing in this industry. And let me give you an example. It's pretty well known that most clinicians, restated, 20% of the clinicians that buy things do not negotiate. The industry knows this. And so they're going to come out with a price of $200,000 as an opening price, because they know 20% of the clinicians are going to say okay to $200,000. But they also go from $200,000, they stop and say, well, the next price is $180,000. And the next 20% says okay to that. And then they'll drop another $160,000. And the next 20% says that. And then they'll drop another, down to $140,000. And the next 20 says okay to that. And then they drop another. And the next one, if you think about it, what's really called is their ASP, their actual sales price, is between that 200 and 100 or 120. And they're really in that 140 to 150 range is their actual sales price on average. So you've got these behaviors that are built in to the industry because the customer base doesn't have a strong financial acumen for the most part, also feels a lot of pressure and a lot of motion to buy. So it goes back to take your time, slow down, be mindful of where you're getting financial advice, and do a massive amount of research, because you don't want to be that person that's paying $200,000 where you were competing now with somebody across the street that paid $100,000, because their return on capital is going to be so much more effective. And ultimately, they're going to be able to undercut you on pricing because they're going to get their return on capital back quicker.
Yeah. So when you're buying a new device, I think that's something probably a lot of practice owners don't necessarily know. Like you said, I think there are a lot of people that just assume the price is the price and they say yes or they say no and they move on to other things. So I think something really important to remember is a lot of those businesses, those manufacturers are using variable pricing, which means you do have room to negotiate as a practice owner for the most part.
Yes.
And so the second thing you mentioned there was the option for pre-owned products, and that you all have a lot of those in your inventory as an example. What are the price differences between buying a new laser versus a pre-owned laser, I guess first, and then I got a couple of follow-up questions to that.
Well, typically a pre-owned. This is what's really sad about the industry is the industry has made up this protocol called recertification fees, and often it's referenced that it's an FDA guideline. This is absolute nonsense. The FDA is very supportive of this third-party service market. They're very supportive of the secondary sales market. And the best way to think about this is, CAT scans and MRIs and PET scanners and rad rooms and ultrasounds. What people don't understand is if you go to the hospital, you're being treated often on these diagnostic instruments. They could be chemistry, hematology, they could be imaging, as I mentioned, they could be all kinds of things. But what people don't understand is that there are third-party companies that are in there servicing all this equipment, and often the hospitals will use GE, for example, imaging to service all of the imaging equipment, not just the GE equipment. So third-party service is so common in healthcare, not only domestically but internationally. This idea that third-party service doesn't exist in doesn't exist in aesthetics, and we're not going to allow it, is completely fabricated and made up by the manufacturers as another tactic to get customers to buy new equipment. And the best way to look at this is there's several companies that are publicly traded. One of them in particular I'm referencing that has a 76% gross margin after paying all costs. So basically, to run their business costs for every $100,000 product, 20,000 of it is what it costs to run the whole business, including making the product. So they have $80,000 in profit in that. Why in the world would they be supportive of anybody selling a secondary market product when their cost of goods is so bloody low? They would never do that. So they create these barriers that are artificial and made up to keep people from reselling things. Why is this important to discuss as it goes to resell? Because this is why there hasn't been a strong resale market, is because customers can't go out and get service for those products if they sell them or if they bought them from anybody other than the manufacturer because of these recertification fees. I believe these will all be gone in 2 or 3 years. I believe that all manufacturers will be in the pre-owned business. I believe all of them will be supporting the secondary market. So this is a short-term thing. But in the meantime, it's companies like us that have some of the best techs in the world, have access to parts. This is a funny thing that manufacturers don't think that I realize, and other companies like I do realize, is they still think that we all work in a flat world. It's actually a global world, Ricky. I know that's shocking, and there's a lot of globalization going on every day, and it's just as easy to order parts from other parts of the world and get them here in the same time frame we can get something from Dayton. And so access to parts is actually surprisingly easy for some of these things. And I think we're going to see the market become very sophisticated as the imaging market is, where there's a real holistic kind of ecosystem and life cycle that exists between pre-owned and new. And that's going to happen in this space too. But in the meantime, you've got to find partners and companies like us that will support pre-owned devices after the sale. Right now, we're very profitable because of that as a company. But ultimately, we want to see happen is we want to step out of the ownership process and allow those transactions to happen between buyer and seller, and we help facilitate those. But ultimately, the goal here is to get the sellers to retain their equity rather than give it to us because they don't have the ability to resell it. And in turn, the buyers will be able to get a better deal because we're not sitting in the middle of it. So in the short term, you have to find partners like us that will backstop you. In the next 2 to 3 years, you're going to see all of that go away, and you're going to see buyers and sellers actively working together.
Is there any downside with warranty or support in terms of buying a pre-owned device versus a new device? Any concern there?
Absolutely. There's all kinds of barriers to get consumables and get support and maybe get software upgrades. Those are legitimate concerns. Some of them are more legitimate than others. But just think about this for a minute. The reason why you have to understand that this is going away and this glass ceiling is going to be shattered is, would you buy a Tesla if you couldn't get windshield wipers? I mean, on the secondary market? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. I mean, we have whole industries that have evolved and grown and matured because of the secondary market. Can you imagine the boating industry if there wasn't the resale of boats? This is always one of the fascinating debates that I get into is this argument that somehow a hair removal laser is more complicated than a potentially autonomous car. I'm going to argue that we're on the dawn of autonomous driving, and I think it's infinitely more complicated to do that than remove hair. But yet, this industry seems to think that we're all dumb enough that somehow that that we can't get support and service for that. So I think there are some legitimate barriers out there, but Ricky, in complete candor, I think they're all going to go away.
Makes sense. So I did want to shift the conversation to end here to MRP. Looking at the website, just wanted to ask a few questions because I think it's awesome what you all are doing. The podcast mission is to bring information and resources to the people listening, and I think you all are a resource. So I did want to just touch on a few things. So we mentioned the pre-owned inventory. I was looking at the live section of the website. It was kind of neat. It looked like there are live camera feeds of people. Are they repairing devices? What's going on there on the website there?
There's quite a few cameras that are all over the facility. The facility here is broken up over 3 buildings. It's quite large, and we have cameras everywhere. They're not all on right now, but over the next year, you're going to see another 30 or 40 cameras pretty much at every aspect of the business. There's a number of reasons for it. One of the biggest reasons, I'll just explain this, is we ship things every single day, and if somebody says they're missing something, we can go back to that camera feed and either show them where to find it in the box, or if we made a mistake, we can find it. Also, we receive a lot of items in for repair and for warranty and for sale, and often we're missing things, and it's great to be able to show that video recording. But the next thing is if somebody wants to look at the status of their repair or what's going on, or did we actually work on it? Did we put new lamps in? Did we calibrate it? We have complete video archiving of every single place where a device stops and where it moves. So you can actually look at the technician working on your device and to see that he or she actually calibrated to manufacturer specifications. So if you think about it down the road, if there's any adverse event, we can go back to that moment in time and show that the device was actually calibrated and meeting manufacturer specifications when it left our facility. And so that's super important from a standpoint of patient safety and ultimate compliance and sleep well for our customers. But really the biggest thing is and what this is all about is really providing transparency. Is we're moving to a virtual world, and our customer base deserves the fact that they can see that we're a physical presence. We have a building. There's assets here. People are working on things, and those things are live 24/7. And we're going to be adding more and more because we're really finding that customers, I actually find this quite intriguing that they can see this. And right now, if you wanted to say, "Hey, Scott, can you walk over in front of a camera?" I could walk over in front of a camera and wave at you and in real time. And so it's just something that started out as kind of a protection mechanism and is really evolved into what we think is going to be a really cool feature where people can see transparently everything that's happening.
Yeah, I loved that. In terms of MRP being a resource for practice owners right now, what all do you have available? What kind of services are you offering? I saw that you have the option to buy, and then you have a sell trade tab, which looks like maybe you're working with a partner in a network there. So, and then you also had some practice management guides and resources. Can you just give us a synopsis real quick of everything that you all offer? And
it's super simple. So in the short term, we sell used equipment, we sell new equipment. We work with a lot of new manufacturers, even selling some of their demos and overstocks, big brand manufacturers that we know. We also work with on pre-owned, as everyone knows, as well on a massive basis. We're the largest pre-owned reseller in the world. We also have the largest depot-based service facility in the world, with more technicians on site than any manufacturers. Just in pre-owned systems alone, we ship over 100 to 150, 150 to 200 systems a month worldwide. That's just in pre-owned. In December of last year, 2022, we sold more new than we did used. So we're processing a lot of equipment, and with that comes service and parts. Currently today, we have 10,000 parts on our website, pre-owned parts, new parts. We'll be adding another 10,000 parts over the next 3 to 6 months. That's going to be a big part of what we're doing. We're starting to add more and more services on our platform because a marketplace really should encompass everything, not just devices and not just selling things and not just buying used things or just buying parts, but really we need to find partners like yourself and bring them to the platform because customers need to market. They need to get patient acquisition. They need to brand themselves. And the same thing in your space, it's very difficult for you to get customer acquisition. You're a superior provider of internet and data solutions, and you really need to be on the platform or against your colleagues in the industry to show and showcase your products and services with the peer-to-peer reviews. So ultimately, we say things from linens to SEO to pay-per-click to website development. Could be. We actually have a partner on there that does build out for spas. Just anything you can imagine should be on the ecosystem for customers to make comparative analysis on what's the best decision for their practice. Because I ultimately find in the conversations I'm having every day that the majority of the opportunity that clinicians have are to utilize the assets that they have, either trade them in to get other things that they need or repurpose them in some way. You'd be surprised how many times in a daily phone call my team simply needs to retrain a customer on a product they have. They often will go spend another $100,000 because the person that was trained on the product wasn't properly trained. We have a platform that we own called MetaQuipTech, which has over 800 techs and trainers on the platform, like Angie's List. You referenced a partner potentially on selling something that's not a partner. It's a platform we have called LaserMatch. It is the largest database of, it's actually a side-by-side marketplace, but it's anonymous. And that's a whole nother podcast on why it's anonymous. But basically, sellers can put their information in anonymously so nobody bothers them. Buyers can put their information in and there's a match, and then we connect them if they're interested. So it's a way for people, without putting their stuff on a platform like eBay or ours, ultimately they can put it out into the world and make it available to people. And if there's a match, they can contact one another in a secured environment. Now, you may wonder, well, why does that have to exist? There's a lot of reasons. Somebody may have 7 or 8 assets. They're not utilizing them all, but they don't want anybody to know they're selling them. And so, that would be one of many reasons why the platform has to be anonymous. So we've created these things that are called trust enablers that allow marketplaces to function. And those are all things that we're currently either evolving, we're building, or we're currently operating.
That's awesome. I love what you all are doing. I'm happy we got connected and really excited to share this with our audience. So parting, where can people find you, Scott, more about MRP?
Yeah, just mrp.io is a great way to reach out. You can connect with me at Scott at mrp.io. I'm happily or readily available to talk to anybody on any problem. Could be a warranty problem, could be a service issue. I'm happy to work with anybody on anything if it makes sense.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Scott, for joining us. It was great to have you on, and we'll have to have you on again sometimes. I enjoyed the conversation.
Ricky, it was a pleasure. Thank you for reaching out. I'm super excited about what you guys are doing, the podcast and reaching people. You've had some great episodes in which you're really providing some amazing data out there to, what's important to us and it's important to you is we're all about changing this industry. We really want to see it improve. It's exponentially growing, and there's so much great opportunity, and really communicating and creating content and getting that information out is so critically important. And we really at MRP, all of us here, applaud you for what you've done.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Yeah, we've been enjoying it so far, and I think we're on a roll. I think it's fun to provide this information and to add resources, especially for practice owners that might not know about a lot of these things, maybe don't have business acumen. I think it's been a great resource so far, so I can look forward to continuing it.
Awesome. Hey, thanks again for the time.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Appreciate it. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. This podcast is a production of MedSpa Magic Marketing. If your med spa or aesthetic practice is in need of digital marketing services, help with advertising on Facebook, Instagram, Google, lead generation, and booking more appointments, please visit medspamagicmarketing.com.